would be the first healthcare bill that we should have, and then you can work from there. But you should start by mandating the entire legislative branch of the United States of America should have to use the same healthcare and benefit plan that every other federal employee has to do. Okay. If it doesn't affect you or your family, how can you be interested in getting it fixed? Do you understand what I'm saying?
I absolutely agree. I support that. The Republicans offered such amendment in committee. Some of the committees took it, some of it didn't. Well, I can't imagine that there would be a bill that Congress could get away with not putting themselves in it because the outrage in the general public is overwhelming. Kristen?
Scott Banfield, Angola, Indiana. With the passage of TARP, a measure that you voted in favor of, we now have the federal government in control of 2 of the automakers, several of our largest banks, and largest insurance company in the world. It's an understatement to say that there are constitutional issues there. I'm glad to see that you're drawing the line at the government controlling health care, but looking at your voting record, you seem to stick to the Constitution on many issues, but often when there's legislation that comes up that can provide a significant short-term benefit to the constituents in your district, suddenly the Constitution isn't so important anymore. Would you be willing to join with thousands of us who are making a pledge to relearn and recommit to the principles, the founding principles contained in the Constitution, and please give us a reason to vote for you next time around?
Fairly frequently, and let me, I assume that others will bring it up tonight, so let me address a couple things said on there. One on TARP. It was an incredibly difficult vote. I cast 3 votes for that right before an election, knowing, as I often say, I have 3,500 emails telling me where I would spend eternity and what the temperature would be. I didn't make a political vote. I made a vote. We had a 4.5-hour brawl inside the Republican Congress, and basically, other than Joe Issa, I believe every single business person with a business background voted for TARP. The ones who voted against it were attorneys, because they hadn't run a business. The facts of where our economic system was last fall, I believe, required a TARP vote, particularly here in Elk Park County. We were having businesses having their cash squeezed, whether they were retailers, manufacturers, or whatever, and they would call our office, have pastors call me and say, I'm getting foreclosed on, I've never made a bad payment. Now, part of that was the interbank lending rate was collapsing. One major company in the United States had to borrow money because they had the money. The bank went to get the money, they couldn't get the money, and they had to borrow from the government of Romania to meet the payroll of one of the largest companies in the Great Lakes state. It wasn't in my district. That it was an incredibly close call to complete collapse. Now, after, quite frankly, the Democrats took over, they moved from a financial support system to taking over. AIG was a mistake. That was not voted on by Congress. Our votes came post-AIG beyond that. AIG was a mistake, and they do that. But the mistake is, do not take common stock. That is a definition of socialism, because the government then owns the company. The fact is, as far as precedent, is that George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, and others demanded, as part of the constitutional settlement in the southern states joining, that the federal government paid their state debts that they individually owned as planters to the country of England as part of the agreement. We have national bank arguments. We have lent money to canals, and the government has funded money to the Transcontinental Railroad. That lending is not unconstitutional. What I believe violates the sense of what the Constitution is for the government to take common stock in the banks, in GM, in the variety of institutions, and that's where we've headed, and that is different than where we were last fall. Now, I read the Constitution regularly. One of the problems in the Constitution, to be honest, and particularly if you read the actual verbatim rather than books about, but the minutes that they were taking, in the constitutional debates, it's clear that there were a lot of differences of opinion, and some of the language there is what I would call legal room language, and anything that's interstate commerce, language that says the president has the power to implement anything that he basically deems fit. In fact, Alexander Hamilton stormed out for a month of July and only came back at the tail end because he believed the president should be for life and not be restricted by others. John Jay didn't participate because he was more of a federalist and didn't believe there should be as much states' rights in it. Madison supported calling a constitutional convention rather than the Articles of Confederation because he believed the states had too much power. And Madison wanted the federal government to get control of currency, and particularly the financial area, because states were printing money, states were forgiving private debts. In Connecticut, they had forgiven all the private debts, and the government absorbed private debts, and they formed the Constitutional Convention. Now, the reason I say that is one of the most revered documents that we all have is the Federalist Papers. That's Hamilton, Jay, and Madison. And we as conservatives quote the Federalist Papers. Remember, the Federalist Papers were Federalists, not states' rights people. But, that said, they would be appalled at watching the growth of the federal government today. Their concept of federalism was much more minimalist than it is today. So you have to kind of look at both the context they're in, that how they tried to come up with a compromise, what they were trying to do. But as we're reading the Constitution, I read it regularly. It's not like it's a long document that we should. In fact, I supported legislation in my first term that we passed when the Republicans were in control of Congress. It's off now, but it shows the difficulty that required the constitutional justification to be added to every bill. The problem is that you write the Interstate Commerce Clause, a couple of others, the courts upheld tremendous interventions. That the Constitution, unfortunately, is open to interpretation. What you are probably, like myself, is a strict constructionist. It's not a matter of constitutional interpretation. It's how you believe it should be interpreted, which is narrowly and limited in a way, which is strict constructionist interpretation of the Constitution.